How do you sell a burger? Well, you could use Superman.
All good, man.
Sometimes the bacon.
But how do you sell Batman? You use Nickelback, I guess. That works for Superman too, apparently. The history of comics and commercial advertising is so dense. This is something I wanted to cover for a long time, but there are so many odds and ends and different rabbit holes you could go down with the subject. Like, you could make a whole video essay just about the history and production of the OnStar Batman commercials alone, and that by itself would be pretty compelling. But instead, I just wanted to give a general overview of the history of things and talk about some of the advertising campaigns that have felt the most significant to me. But swim, I hear you asking. Why does any of this matter in the first place? Why care about commercial tie-ins, product placement, or brand sponsorships at all?
No one is asking you that, Swim.
Well, it's complicated, but the easiest way to put it is that the way they sell the action figures will always influence the way they write the books. Now swap out action figure for upcoming movie, upcoming video game, Happy Meal toys, whatever. Now, I'm not saying I agree with it, I'm not saying if that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm just saying it is what it is, and that's how the sausage is made. But that's enough of a tangent for now. So with all that out of the way, I'd like to give a big thank you to channel members and patrons, and let's get started. A lot of people have a lot of theories about why superheroes have become unappealing to mass audiences.
I go, what about this?
But I don't think it's because superheroes are going woke. I don't think it's because superheroes are selling politics. I think it's because superheroes are selling burgers and politics.
You built these weapons to destroy us, cause we are different. Humanity has always feared that which is different.
Eat like you mean it. Only at Carl's Jr. The X-Men Days of Future Past in cinemas.
Shows like The Boys thrive on parodying stuff like this. In the same way that you see athletes and celebrities push MLMs and diarrhea tea in real life, you see superheroes on The Boys selling everything from guns to religion. The ironic thing about that might be that The Boys has fallen into the same trap as Marvel and DC characters.
The rest of them. Get it? Done.
But honestly, I think that's kind of inevitable for all these different brands and IPs. It helps you split the cost of advertising between multiple parties, and it makes sure that people are aware of the IP in one way or another. But is it a necessary evil, or is it a deal with the devil? Your mileage may vary. While an actor or an athlete might say yes or no to a brand deal depending on the product that's being pushed, if the actress who plays She-Hulk says no to a brand deal, then Marvel can just CGI She-Hulk into the ad instead.
Endorse baby powder. Apologize for endorsing baby powder. Made a mistake.
Like, there are no movie stars anymore. Like, Anthony Mackie isn't a movie star. The Falcon is a movie star.
In the world of advertising, there's a direct through line between old school TV production and the sponsored ad reads that get shilled by all of your favorite YouTubers.
They had sponsorships with Kellogg's and Winston cigarettes. Each story also had a unique skit that served as a sponsor read that usually had something to do with the plot of the episode.
The introduction of superheroes as mascots for brand sponsorships is nothing new either. And this has always been a thing for as long as comics have existed. There have always been ads in comic books. But in the modern post-Mad Men era of advertising, it goes just a little bit deeper.
The evolution of the superhero has meant the death of the movie star. And that's the fear now, because you're now making movies for 16-year-olds and China. And that's it.
I feel like I'm losing you, so let's get back to the cars. So if Disney says that every MCU character ever is going to be in a car commercial, then the MCU is going to be pushing cars hard, even if it makes 0 sense in terms of product placement. Like in Spider-Man Homecoming, where Peter Parker can't even drive yet in the context of the story, and then that's played up as a joke. And some of this stuff is just so odd. Like, did you know that if there's a TV in a Spider-Man movie, it has to be a Sony TV? Or if someone uses a phone, it has to be a Sony Xperia phone? Let me ask you something. Do you know a single person in real life with a Sony Xperia Android phone? I do, unfortunately. I had one years ago, and it was probably the worst piece of shit phone I ever used. But I think the massive amounts of product placement in superhero movies does a lot to kind of bog down the heroes in the minds of the masses. Like, if you want to use Deadpool to sell Mike's Hard Lemonade, sure, whatever. But all the car ads in Marvel movies are just kind of ridiculous. Like I said earlier, these are characters that are being used to sell burgers and politics at the same time. So it sort of makes sense that there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance that's not really breaking for people. Grant Morrison and Neil Gaiman have both made comparisons between comic book superheroes and Greek gods. Comic books are like a mirror to American culture, because comics are basically American mythology. Maybe not in a religious sense, but in a cultural sense. Comic book superheroes are our cultural American gods. These are characters that are supposed to represent the best and worst in us. They're supposed to represent ideals we can hope and strive to achieve, like freedom, responsibility, justice, and liberation. But instead, they're being used to shill cheeseburgers. But you know, when I think about it, there might not be anything more American than that after all. All this moral grandstanding, but there's not a single word about factory farm conditions. Not unless you're Animal Man or Grant Morrison in the 1980s anyway. But it's not always just to sell cheeseburgers. I think when a lot of people my age think about the cartoons they watched growing up, they remember stuff like the CN City bumpers or Cartoon Fridays. With the switch to streaming, a lot of that stuff kinda got lost to time, which makes the context of it feel more and more foreign looking back on it.
If you want propane and propane accessories, you give me a call.
Now, Hank, slow down. You'll miss the turn.
Peggy, you know, I think we're lost. Mr. Surfer, where's the dang, highway?
Thanks for joining us for Fox Kids Leaves the Hills.
Hey, take it easy. There's no need to be tailgating that comment.
But at the end of the day, these are still just commercials, even if they look pretty and have a nice vibe to them. But that being said, I think there is still a lot of artistry to be appreciated in this. Commercial art is still art. All art is art in my opinion. And generally, art deserves appreciation. So I think it's kind of nice that people feel so nostalgic about these old commercials. Putting the history of comics and commercials into context gets oddly complicated very fast. You start back in the 40s with stuff like war bonds and x-ray glasses scams. Then you fast forward to the 80s with action figures and Happy Meal toys. But by the time you get to the modern day, we end up talking about military propaganda in Marvel movies and Chinese censorship laws affecting how the MCU is written. So yeah, the topic isn't just selling toys and trading cards. It's also about justifying the atomization of an entire civilian city through propaganda tools like dehumanization. We'll touch on some of these more than others, but the point that I want to get across before I go any further is that commercializing these characters will always be complicated. One generation's standards and practices might be viewed as malicious and manipulative by the next. You're either going to find these examples to be charming or fraudulent and deceptive in nature. Oh, and also, there's a 50-50 chance this is going to be one of those videos where I have to change the title and thumbnail every few weeks, and one of those options is comic book commercial iceberg. So if that's the one that ends up working, here's the iceberg, and here's the timestamps for each part of it. Videos about Batman or Spider-Man tend to do pretty good in the algorithm, but videos like this are always 50-50 whether they hit or not. So dropping a like really does make a difference, but more than anything, comments help out a ton. So do me a favor and drop a comment below telling me about a comic commercial that you remember. And then after the video's over, we can see whether or not I talked about it. So now that we got all that out of the way, let's talk about fruit pies. So back in the late 70s and early 80s, Hostess would buy these one-page ads featuring comic characters to sell their sweets. Sometimes the Hostess cakes would cause the problem, sometimes they'd be the solution, and sometimes Wonder Woman would crack fat jokes at the expense of the thieves after she used the cupcakes to help catch them.
No, not just this fruit pie.
Yeah, so these ads were weird. But these ads were also synonymous with comics and commercial advertising back in the day, which is probably why they're still parodied so often in modern comics. Now, I grew up decades after this advertising campaign ended, but I became aware of it because of how much it gets referenced and parodied in the modern day. Which means decades and decades later, this advertising campaign is still putting in work somehow. If you're curious about these wacky old ads, you can check out an archive at seanbaby.com/hostess. Sean Baby was a writer for Cracked back in the day, and has some pretty solid comic content, so give his website a scroll if you're curious. Now, the Hostess ads seem like a logical jumping on point for two reasons. Because they're one of the most well-known examples of this kind of thing, and by explaining how they worked in conjunction with the comics, it also helps contextualize how other brands used comic book marketing later on down the road, like Keebler and Titans back in the 80s. So back in 1983, thanks to Ronald Reagan's war on drugs, Keebler sponsored an anti-drug PSA using the Teen Titans. So Keebler, Ronnie Reagan, and the Teen Titans, they were all working together to stop kids from smoking the marijuanas.
The packages were distributed to schools throughout the U.S. and were used in classrooms by more than 20 million children.
Drugs are a normal part of growing up.
There was just one problem. The rights to Robin were tied up with the Super Friends license, which was owned by Nabisco. And Nabisco wasn't willing to play ball with Keebler. So because of that issue, they created the Protector as a substitute. The Protector would be used in 3 issues of a tie-in comic and the cartoon PSA. And funny enough, that PSA is still partially lost media. The character wouldn't get referenced again until 4 years later in the 1987 release of Who's Who in the DCU, which revealed that the character and the comic PSAs were considered canon to the DC universe. The character would have a few cameos over the years, but he never really appeared in any substantial way until 2019's Heroes in Crisis, where the character was subverted and satirized with the revelation that he had been an anti-drug crusader for cash, but in truth, had been suffering from a debilitating drug addiction himself. So, the conundrum of the Protector's creation and Robin being tied up with another license is interesting for a number of reasons. At the time, the Titans were considered the most popular characters that DC had to offer, but Robin was their connection to Batman, who's not just one of the most popular DC characters, but one of the most popular characters in all of fiction literally ever. So what we have here are multiple factors in real life affecting how the comics were written. Factors ranging from licensing issues between Nabisco and Keebler, the funding from the US government to make a public service announcement, the real life war on drugs that caused that, and just the popularity of these characters in general. It's a sticky situation that DC had actually found themselves in before. So you kinda gotta ask yourself, are the Titans really the Titans without a Robin? I think the jury's out on that one. So how can you have Robin in two places at once? Or at the very least, how do you license the same character to two separate brands without having either one catch on? What's the best way to double dip? And this is the real beauty of comics, and I've said it over and over again. The best thing about comics is that a character can die and come back to life, and there's still impact on the story. A character can have his secret identity revealed, and you see what happens in the world because of it, and then they can take that back. The best part about comics is you can have your cake and eat it too. Double dipping. So this is speculation on my part, but another factor that I haven't seen many people discuss, or at least I haven't seen anyone make the connections between these two stories, is that at the time, Batman editorial wanted Robin back from the Titans, but Dick Grayson as a character was moving more and more into being an adult, so making him a kid sidekick for Batman again wouldn't really work character-wise. When they made The Protector, Nightwing didn't exist yet, but over the course of the next year, the folks at DC came up with the idea to have Dick become Nightwing on the Titans and to introduce a new Robin for Batman. It's never been officially stated, but I can't help but speculate that the introduction of a Robin who's not Robin, but the kids could identify as Robin, I think that might have helped inspire the creation of Nightwing. Like I said earlier, it's double dipping. It's so they could license the same character to two separate brands without having either one of them catch on. How do you have Robin in two places at once? Well, you have Nightwing in one place, and then you have a new Robin, Jason Todd, in the other. Now, there's no proof that the creation of the Protector inspired the creation of Nightwing. This is just a swim theory, but this stuff happens so close together, I can't help but imagine that one affected the other. And something else that's kind of interesting about this, so 10 years prior to the anti-drug PSA, there had been another anti-drug issue of Green Lantern Green Arrow, the infamous My Ward is a Junkie issue. I was kind of curious whether or not they'd bring that up here, and to my surprise, they actually did. I thought that was pretty neat and really clever. Like, you have a character who actually does, in canon, have a drug problem, and then he's talking to people about why people use drugs and why you shouldn't. It's not like goody two-shoes Superman telling you not to smoke weed when you know he's never smoked weed. Like, you've seen Speedy shoot up heroin and he's telling you it's bad, so you know heroin's bad. This is a tangent, but there's a whole lot of research on why the war on drugs was ineffective. At worst, it didn't really do anything, and at best, it actually encouraged drug use. There's a really good YouTube video about how anti-smoking and anti-vaping PSAs actually make people vape and smoke more, and I think that same kind of thing happened with the war on drugs to some extent. But all that is to say is that using Speedy, using Red Arrow, it makes the message feel a little bit more valid in my opinion. It's funny to think that Ronald Reagan's war on drugs and the creation of a PSA to make kids think drugs are lame would have a rippling effect on comics and continuity even decades and decades later, but it did. And this is what I like to call a Type A HyperCrisis event. Now, what is the HyperCrisis, you might ask? It's the theory of everything for comic books, or at the very least, it's my theory of everything for comic books. It's not really my theory, but this is like my modified version of the theory. This video is a part of it, and I'm not going to be explaining much about the HyperCrisis for probably a long time now, but like I said, this video is part of it, and pretty much every video I have planned for the next 2 years is also part of the HyperCrisis theory, as well as my last few videos. So we're not going to talk about the HyperCrisis.
We're going to keep her out of it.
And instead we're going to save that HyperCrisis discussion for the future.
Also in the past.
This is another thing that I'm not sure if I'm going to end up covering in the video or not, because a lot of it's rumor and it's unsubstantiated and you're not supposed to talk about this, but basically there were a lot of leaked emails between Amy Pascal and Kevin Feige, where Kevin Feige was basically saying like, hey, don't go in this direction for the Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's not going to go good. And then everyone at Sony is like, oh, well, the kids love dubstep and skateboarding, so Andrew Garfield should, ride a skateboard and, dubstep. People don't know this and people don't talk about this, but this is a big part of being Spider-Man. And what being Spider-Man means as an actor. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to go and like be the brand spokesperson. You don't just represent Spider-Man and Marvel, you represent Sony. Like Sony makes video games, cell phones, TVs, yes. So you're selling PlayStations and blah, 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 blah. But Sony makes more money off of life insurance than all of that other shit combined. So like Sony is a big mega corporation. And one of the ways you get in rooms is you have Spider-Man there. After The Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out, it had flopped. Andrew Garfield had gone to this Sony event, right? And he was supposed to meet with these like business executives and blah, 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 blah. And you have some business executive in Brazil and his kid wants to meet Spider-Man. So all of a sudden you have this $1 billion deal in Brazil and it falls through because Andrew Garfield calls out sick. The client's son doesn't get to meet Spider-Man. The client doesn't make the business deal with Sony. But it's literally because of that. That's the real reason that Sony forced Amy Pascal to work with Kevin Feige in the MCU. The first time that Kevin Feige suggested to Amy Pascal that they bring Spider-Man to the MCU, Amy Pascal threw a sandwich at his head. They were gonna go through with a Sinister Six movie and all this stuff, but Andrew Garfield just happened to piss off the wrong person at Sony. And so there's these really weird butterfly effect trickle down ways this stuff affects the comic books and the movies and the end products that we end up seeing. These little like behind the scenes deals, behind the door, blah 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 blah.
Swim Reads Comics. I've been working on a vid on comic commercials. Do you have any favorite examples of that? I have two that I really love. One is when Acura was the official car of Thor: The Dark World.
It's the newly refined Acura TL. And it's the official vehicle of the movie Thor.
What does that mean? That was literally what the commercial said, and it was hilarious to me. They go, the Acura, it has a refined interior, superior styling, an efficient engine, and it's the official car of the movie Thor: The Dark World. I was like, what does that mean? Like, there's no scenes in that movie where like Thor drives an Acura around or anything like that. So that was all that commercial cracks me up. Also, kind of related to this, I loved the animated commercials for the G.I. Joe comic throughout the 80s. They looked great. It was short, but it got me excited. I loved those commercials. I wish they'd do something like that again.
So obviously advertising is kind of a niche topic, but it's one that I'm hyper fixated on and passionate about. My favorite classes in high school were commercial art classes, where we learned graphic design tools like Photoshop and about the psychology of advertising. Those classes had a big impact on me. When I went to college and I got my degree in graphic arts and imaging tech, it was less about the advertising side of things and it was more about the production angle of things. But that advertising element was something that I'd never really let loose of in the back of my head. All this is to say, I've been taking mental notes about a lot of this stuff for years now. So what we're going to do here is we're going to speed run through the next few examples. So here are two odd examples of failed ad integration. One is that time that Superman teamed up with... Oh my goodness! I don't really want to talk about this one much. If you want to find out more about it, then Huggabees has a great video on the subject.
Because he operates in plain sight, befriending the very heroes that we depend on, and does it all with a smile on his face. Look through the comic again, but this time remember that this is 2011, a full 4 years after initial suspicions arose about him, and potentially even longer after he had already done terrible things.
The second example are the recent Happy Meal tie-ins for Captain America 4 and the Marvels.
Swim, you're a grown-ass, thing idea person. Why do you care about the Happy Meal toys they're making for children?
See, that's the thing. I don't. What makes this interesting is that these Happy Meal toys dropped like 6 months before the movie actually came out. Captain America and the Marvels were both delayed over and over and over again. And honestly, I don't even think Captain America 4 drops until like, what, next April? So they're doing these Happy Meal toys in summer 2024 that spoil stuff like Red Hulk being in the movie.
The new Falcon. That's who Sam Wilson gave his XO7 wings to.
And meanwhile, the movie doesn't even come out for another year. Oh, and to go back to the Subway DC comic thing, to make that just a little less icky, they did the same kind of crossover tie-in with KFC a few times, and those did so well, they actually made like 3 sequels. ComicDrake has a great video on those KFC DC comic tie-ins, and I'll be sure to add that to the playlist at the end of the video. So Dazzler is an interesting one to cover. Around 1979, Dazzler was created as a joint venture between Marvel and Casablanca Records. Regans. The idea was sort of inspired by the Archies, a cartoon band that was based off the Archie comic characters of the same name. Which, by the way, fun fact, you know that song, Sugar Sugar, Honey Honey? That's the Archies. Like Archie Comics, Archie the Archies. They wanted to replicate that with an X-Men character, and in order to do that, they made Dazzler. The whole music angle of the character kind of fell through, but she still ended up becoming a cult classic. Fast forward to the late 2010s, and Marvel is looking to capitalize on K-pop with a brand new superhero. They end up making Luna Snow as an original character for a South Korean mobile game, and later on they hire a K-pop artist to voice her for a few tracks. The character never really caught on or gained much traction in the West, but she is coming to Marvel Rivals pretty soon, so that's pretty neat, I guess. If you want to learn more about Dazzler or about Luna Snow, then ComicDrake has some great videos on those characters, and I'll be sure to add those to the playlist at the end of the video.
Let's talk about something that's a little bit more abstract. Have you ever heard someone correct you saying, those aren't Legos, those are Lego bricks? Or maybe you heard someone say something like, no, it's not a Band-Aid, it's a Band-Aid brand adhesive strip. Well, that's because of legal, copyright, trademark, blah, So if Lego calls their Lego bricks just Legos, then that means that Mega Bloks would legally be allowed to call their blocks Legos as well. And if Mega Bloks is selling off-brand Legos, then the poor quality of the Mega Bloks product could damage the Lego company as a whole. That kind of legal mumbo-jumbo logic is how this commercialism stuff really affects the comics. Earlier, I talked about Sony's product placement in Marvel movies, but did you know that MJ's name in the MCU movies is also the result of legal mumbo-jumbo loopholes? Let me explain. Sony can use Adrian Toome's Vulture in the Morbius post-credit scene. They could also use Mary Jane, but they can't use Michelle Jones. So, legally speaking, Michelle Jones is an original character that was co-created by Marvel and Disney. She's not a derivative version of the previous Mary Jane from the comics. She's a legally distinct MJ from the Mary Jane in typical Marvel canon. She's a separate character legally. Now, this is only legally speaking for lawyers. Obviously, fans know that this doesn't really matter, that MJ is MJ, Michelle Jones is Mary Jane. Like, we know that. The fans know that. But to the lawyers, and to Marvel and Sony, this keeps Sony from pulling out of the MCU and throwing Tom Holland into a Venom movie. Sony could still do that, but if they did, they would be losing Michelle Jones and they would be losing Zendaya. And you don't want to do that because Zendaya sells movie tickets. She's part of the reason these movies make money in the first place. So this weird little loophole keeps Disney safe in this stupidly complicated legal deal that lets them use Spider-Man and Spider-Man characters in the MCU. All this is to say, Legos, Mega Bloks, Michelle Jones, and Mary Jane, it's all silly, stupid stuff that you really shouldn't have to care about. But because of branding and marketing and copyright and lawyers, it's vaguely relevant to the next matter at hand, which is a personal nitpick for me. The word MCU. What does the word MCU mean, off the top of your head? The Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yes, very good. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's the world where the Marvel movies take place. Yes, we all agree on that. But which ones? Which movies? Which movies take place in the MCU? Better yet, which projects take place in the MCU? Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., What If, Loki Season 1 and 2? When you ask which movies, which projects, which products take place in the MCU, this is the point where you start to get different answers. So let me ask you another question. Is What If in the MCU? That's an answer that's going to differ from person to person, but the correct answer is yes and no. What If is an MCU product, but it doesn't take place in the MCU, but it is about the MCU. Fast forward a little bit, and now we have all these articles about whether or not X-Men 97 takes place in the MCU or not. And obviously it doesn't, right? But the fandom was outraged, arguing back and forth.
No, Figgy wants to put the X-Men cartoon in the MCU.
And no, he didn't. That was never an option. That was a clickbait headline that was written in a way to outrage people and drive discourse. And guess what? It worked. Congratulations, you've been psyoped. But here's the thing. The MCU isn't just the MCU. When we say MCU, we're also referring to the entire Marvel Cinematic Multiverse. So we should be calling it the MCM, but that's too close to MLM, and MCU is already ingrained in SEO statistics, so again, this is a branding thing. If all Marvel properties from the Raimi movies to the 90s animated shows are all in the MCU, meaning the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse, then if only by technicality that also makes X-Men 97 a part of the MCU. But only in the same way that What If is in the MCU. To escalate this a point further, the same production studio who made What If also made X-Men 97, which makes X-Men 97 an MCU production. So the word MCU can mean the sacred timeline, or it can mean the Marvel multiverse, or it can just mean Marvel in general as a production house. Honestly, I think the reason they introduced the concept of the sacred timeline is so the sacred timeline can replace how we use the word MCU and how we use Earth 616 or Earth 100. All we're doing is arguing over semantics. This is a literal potato debate for elementary schoolers, and comic Twitter is doing it all day long, every fucking day. I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm not saying if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying this is what it is, and this is what people need to get through their heads. The word MCU just means Marvel now. Marvel is the MCU now. The word MCU does not just mean the MCU. It doesn't just mean the sacred timeline anymore. And if you're getting upset about clickbait headlines using the word MCU to optimize SEO, then you're completely missing the point. So in layman's terms, the Mega Blocks are just Legos. Fuck off with your pedantic actually nerd shit. You're making your social media brownie points by dunking on children and stealing from each other. Nothing about this is honorable. Okay, so Lila is asking, what about the Amazing Spider-Man burger? There's so many little oddities, right? Like the Amazing Spider-Man burger, there's the Venom Burger that's like straight up black that was only released in Japan. There's the Batman Little Caesars pizza. There's so many little odds and ends of like food stuff. You could probably make a video just about that.
There are a lot of ways you can market things or sell them, and untraditional marketing is usually referred to as guerrilla marketing. So stuff like Adult Swim putting up light bright billboards and getting Boston shut down for a day, that's guerrilla marketing. So I don't know if this next one counts as guerrilla marketing or not, but I think it's close enough. It's weird marketing. When they aired the Star Wars movies in Chile in 2003, they were sponsored by this beer company called Cerveza Cristal. And instead of cutting to commercials, the scenes would cut to a character grabbing a beer and then they'd play the jingle.
I have something here for you.
A few of these scenes went viral a few months ago, and they're pretty charming. So all this is to say, there are a lot of ways to sell a person a pin, but your mileage may vary depending on what your pin is and how you sell it. Now here's a really good example of someone who sold their pin very poorly.
Let's let Flash, Shazam, Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman. Let's let them know something. Things will never be the same, because the hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change.
Remember the Black Adam marketing campaign? I'm gonna be a little lazy here, but this dude sums it up way better than I could. Go check out his TikTok if you're curious, but here's everything the Black Adam release did wrong.
The way that they marketed Black Adam and put him in like genuinely everything was so strange. They really wanted this character to work and resonate with the general audience. He was one of the few DC characters added to multiverses over characters like The Flash or Green Lantern, even Shazam, which is very strange because he's a Shazam villain. He got added to Fortnite, and this was literally the last DCEU skin ever added to the game. Like, they really wanted to add Black Adam to Fortnite. He was in the end credit scene of DC Super Pets, and they were setting him up to fight Superman in this movie for some reason. I don't know why that was such a big thing that The Rock wanted to happen. It was like, oh yeah, Black Adam, he has the powers of Superman. No, he doesn't. He has literally the exact same powers as Shazam. Yeah, and I can't forget about the Black Adam experience in Roblox.
Dwayne Johnson here. I'm inviting you to check out the Black Adam experience on Roblox.
But at the end of the day, all of this weird marketing led to probably the funniest video of all time.
It's time for India versus Pakistan.
What you supposed to be rearranging the hierarchy or something?
I feel like everything I covered in the video so far is really exemplified in the Black Adam marketing campaign. All the best and worst and cringiest parts of modern marketing, it's all there. Patrick H. Willems goes a little bit further on why The Rock is the way he is in his video on the actor, but I just think it's kind of interesting to look and see where this all kind of started versus where we're at today with it. But what about how things have changed in the last 10 years alone? Even if people think Deadpool and community-style meta-humor is a little played out in the modern day, there was a point in time about 10 or 15 years ago where it felt groundbreaking and revolutionary. But stuff like Deadpool showing up on late-night shows or Peacemaker doing the same thing, that's just stuff the Muppets have been doing for decades. Spider-Man even showed up to the Kids' Choice Awards back in 2002. There's a really interesting angle you could examine with how they bend the fourth wall for metaverse shenanigans, kind of like CN City, but that's so dense and so complicated, I kind of think I'm going to save it for its own video someday in the future. I just thought it was worth note because at the end of the day, the Muppets, Deadpool, or Peacemaker showing up on a late night show and the hosts acting like they're real, that's still advertising for the products. When you watch a late night show and you see the Muppets, or when you watch an award show and you see the Muppets, you're still watching an ad for the Muppets.
All right,
Hey,
oh,
Carl.
here we go. That's you, right?
No, that's Matt's mask. Mine's the one with the white eyes.
Oh, right. All right, here you go.
That's Wade's mask. White eyes.
Honey, it's Wade's mask.
It's just a more entertaining version of an ad because it feels natural.
Well, hi. So your collar's kind of like 70s. What's up with that?
Yeah. Do you sometimes wish that April was a turtle?
Wait, I've been trying to talk her into an interspecies relationships for months now.
Whoa, man.
And she won't do it, huh?
No, she can't do it.
The biggest problem is she can't hold her breath long enough, you know?
Now compare that to Space Ghost, which is kind of the inverse of what I'm describing. Because on Space Ghost, it's the guest who have to pretend that the host is real, which kind of flips that dynamic on its head a little bit. But we're already getting lost in abstraction, and we can't handle another meta crisis right now. The audience is already too fatigued with multiverse shit because of the MCU. Damn it.
Hey guys, Speedy here with Godzilla. Thanks. Whoa, I have 2 words for you. Breath mints. So, Mr. Zilla, I know you're the strong, silent type, but tell us, where do you stand on
Ooh, spice it up a little, Swim. Dance for the money.
Oh, what? Reagan drugging up a couple of Titans isn't shocking enough for you in the Epstein age? Okay, I got another story for you. How about the fact that Tim Burton lost the 3rd Batman movie, all because a bunch of satanic panic parents got offended by the Batman Returns Happy Meal toys at McDonald's?
The summer's big movie is Batman Returns, and it is already creating controversy. Some parents contend that Batman Returns, which is rated PG-13, is actually being marketed for younger children, and the movie is just too violent.
Where's the flare, Swim?
What's the matter, Six? That story isn't sexy enough for you? Fine. You wanna get nuts? Let's get nuts! The next section of the video can be described in one word and one word alone. Racism! A few years ago, I got a little bit triggered by the Black Widow movie and wanted to make a video about how Chinese censorship policies affect American media. I ended up shelving the video. The long and short of it was supposed to be that Taskmaster's helmet, which is usually a skull in the comics, was changed into this weird knight helmet thing for the movies. The reason for that was Chinese censorship laws. China has laws banning skulls from being used on t-shirts, posters, flags, etc., etc. Basically, they consider skulls offensive.
You're right, this is racist.
But the way that American movie studios pander to Chinese audiences doesn't stop with Taskmaster's helmet being changed. So let's go a little bit deeper. Sentiments of racism towards black people are extremely prevalent amongst the citizens of mainland China. I can remember reading Vice articles about how black people weren't allowed in malls or outlet stores as recently as like 5 years ago. But all this is to say that for the Chinese release of Star Wars Episode 7, for one reason or another, Finn was completely removed from the Chinese poster. And for the Chinese release of Black Panther, nearly all the posters covered up Chadwick Boseman's face. And now, leaked photos have revealed that Sam Wilson, the new Captain America, will have a helmet covering his entire face. Now, it's not unusual for Captain America to wear a mask, but it's not usually a full-face Ant-Man, Iron Man style helmet. I'm just gonna let that speak for itself. I know this is a little bit conspiratorial, but at the same time, I don't think this theory is completely unfounded either. You can have your own opinions on whether or not Taiwan is a country, or if what China is doing to the Uyghur Muslim minorities counts as ethnic cleansing. I certainly have my opinions about it, but what you can't do is ignore the small ripples and butterfly effects that these things have on the media that we consume, or the media that we're allowed to consume, the media that Hollywood is allowed to produce. Allowed by China to produce. Not to go on too much of a tangent, but I'm bisexual.
Oh, he's bisexual. I didn't know that. By the way, I'm bisexual.
And LGBT representation is something that's meant a lot to me in the past. It's why I'm in the minority of people that actually really likes John Kent as Superman. Growing up, I started to see a lot of gay characters, but I didn't really see a lot of bisexual characters. But when I see John Kent, like, I feel seen. That feels special to me. This is a Superman that was just like I am, and that's significant. But the way that Disney panders so heavily with their first gay characters every few months is beyond frustrating. And have you ever noticed that anytime an LGBT character shows up in a Disney product, like a Star Wars movie or a Marvel movie, they're always just in the background? They're never a main character. And when they are a main character, like in Eternals, they shoot it in a way that they can kind of recontextualize it and repurpose it for foreign audiences. Think about the two lesbians in Sailor Moon, and then how the American Toonami version of it made them cousins. That's basically how they shot Eternals. Are you familiar with the concept of pinkwashing or greenwashing? When a company or a brand releases a product, saying that a portion of the proceeds go to charity, but it's not really a charity thing, it's really more of a marketing thing. That's basically what Disney is doing with representation. So you have all these articles that are written about how progressive Disney is for including two lesbians kissing in the background of a scene that they cut out of the movie for Chinese and Middle Eastern audiences. The fact that LGBT characters are only bit parts or background characters, that feels frustrating to me. So when you hear me talking about this, understand what I'm saying. My culture and my people are being erased to pander to an audience of xenophobic racists, and then Disney claims it's progress. It's completely hypocritical. That's why this stuff matters. It matters to the canon of the stories, and it also matters to our collective American culture. Commercialism, consumerism, capitalism, it's all relevant to the meta discussion of why superheroes are the way they are. Remember what I said at the beginning of the video? The way they make the money will always dictate how the story is told. Where they make that money, where they sell their products, who their investors are, all of that matters. This all impacts how the movies are made. So when you hear me complaining about ESG scores, what I'm complaining about is that Disney is basically greenwashing, pinkwashing, profiting off of LGBT culture. It's soft erasure, and then they claim it's progress. And if you try and fight against it, they claim you're the problem. Just try to understand that even if you think I'm wrong, even if you think I'm misguided, I'm trying to approach it from the right direction and for the right reasons. So pandering to foreign audience is this, China that. But Swim, what about the fact that the US military uses superhero comic movies as propaganda machines? Why don't you mention that part? Great point, Straw Viewer. Let's talk about it. US film productions can get assistance from the US military in exchange for influence on the script and how the military is portrayed in the movie. Pretty much any movie you can think of. Sonic the Hedgehog, Iron Man, Predator, Terminator, pretty much all of them have gotten government assistance at one point or another for the production of their films. The idea is that if you make the military look good and you put Superman in handcuffs for the army, then the big nice army men will let you put their jets and tanks in your movie for free. They might even let you film on their bases for all those big action shots of your giant robot movie. But only if the US military are unambiguously the good guys. Because if you make the military look bad, then they won't help you make your movies anymore. And at a certain point, that help from the military is factored into the budgets of these multi-million-dollar productions as a cost-saving measure. So strangely enough, yes, the military does actually have a say over the script of an MCU movie. They don't control the comics themselves, but they absolutely have influence over the films. Here's the best example of how they've influenced the movies. It's Winter Soldier. The entire premise of that movie and the destruction of S.H.I.E.L.D., it's all because of US diplomatic interests. So Marvel could never give the military a clear answer on what S.H.I.E.L.D. was or who they served. In the comics, cartoons, and games, sometimes S.H.I.E.L.D. is a US military branch like the Air Force, and sometimes they're a UN peacekeeping task force like Interpol. Because of the intentional vagueness of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s origin, and because of how the US military almost dropped a nuke on New York City in Avengers 2012, the military threatened to pull support for the Marvel movies around 2013, which led to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s dissolution in Winter Soldier back in 2014. So now you have characters like Sharon Carter that would normally be working for S.H.I.E.L.D., but because of the military bullshit, they always end up working for the CIA or some other government agency.
Full weight of the CIA and my boys working 24/7 at top, yeah.
Channels like Just Right and Second Thought have covered this topic pretty well in the past, and they've done so in a lot more detail and depth than I have time to cover here today. So if you're curious about this angle of comic books and commercials, then be sure to watch their videos on the specifics of things. I'll have their videos, as well as a ton of the other ones that I mentioned, in a playlist at the end of the video. So the subject of comics and commercials is a topic that's like a hydra with a lot of heads. A lot of people have tackled individual angles of it, but very few have actually really connected it all into one grander concept like I wanted to do with this video. And that's a big part of why I wanted to plug so many different creators with this playlist, because I feel like every single video that I mentioned helps double down on my point that advertising is extremely relevant to our everyday lives, and it can be a lot more impactful and influential than people realize. I forget who said it and I forget where I read it, but I saw someone say something like, MK Ultra was created so the government could learn how to influence people. And it didn't exactly exactly help the government mind control people, but it did a lot to help advertisers a couple of decades later. I don't know how true that statement is, but it's something that sat with me and that I've thought about a lot. This video couldn't exist without the work that those other creators put into their videos, and I really want to give them their roses for making great videos on such niche topics. Like, these are niches and sub-niches and sub-niches. Obscure comic commercials that'd be mostly forgotten if not for how bizarre they are. At the same time though, I know that comics and commercials is kind of a controversial topic because of the history of how it's been done poorly or how it's been manipulative or offensive in the past. It can be really hard to draw the line between good ad integration and bad ad integration. I think we can all agree that the worst versions of product placement feel like they distract or take away from the product, like Final Fantasy 15 and the Cup Noodle ads.
I like Cup Noodles as much as anyone, but I think you might like them a little too much, big guy.
There's nothing else like them. They're easy to make whenever you've got a craving, and they're delicious to boot. Dawned on me when I was on my own. Any food you make tastes better when you use good ingredients. Then, if you take something already delicious like cup noodles and add in the finest, freshest ingredients, what do you get? The ultimate flavor experience.
When you do this kind of thing poorly, I think it makes every brand involved look bad. But when ad integration feels natural, well, that's where the magic happens, and that's where I think ad integration is most effective. And there's no better example of natural ad integration than the Ninja Turtles and pizza.
So legend has it, whenever Eastman and Laird were working on the original issues of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they'd stay up late at night eating pizza and grinding out work on the books. And when creatives are creating, a lot of the times they draw on what they know. And that translated the Turtles having a fixation for pizza. In almost every iteration of the Turtles, there's some kind of brand integration with the pizza company. The Turtles will either eat Domino's or Pizza Hut on screen in a movie, or they'll have an action figure that comes with a coupon for a pizza pie. I just think the pizza in Ninja Turtles is one of the most natural and wholesome versions of ad integration. There's sincerity to it, there's heart and there's soul, there are values that can't be quantified or measured. And I think that's why we think of the Turtles and pizza fondly, and then we think of Power Rangers as more of a disingenuous toy commercial. Now of course I'm speaking in broad strokes here, but I think people have always thought that the Turtles had more heart and soul in their production, whereas Power Rangers always felt very corporate and synthetic in its nature. But Turtles versus Power Rangers is a debate for another day.
There are a ton of reasons that advertising is so interesting to me. Like, yeah, I went to school for advertising, but while I was doing research for my Marvel mobile games video, I came across some really disturbing stuff. I spent nearly the whole video avoiding talking about video games just so I can bring it up here. If the best example of comic ad integration is the Ninja Turtles and pizza, then the worst has to be how they make money in the world of video games. The suit was actually paid product placement by Adidas, enraging the community even more over a costume that they already hated.
The absolute worst fucking Spider-Man costume ever designed!
Shit's ass, bro. We found out a bunch of random artists and influencers are getting suits in the game for some reason, and I kinda hate this. Like, Sony is releasing Rina Sawayama's new record, and because of that, they're gonna try and give her a costume tie-in as a promotion for one of their other products. It just feels dirty and boomer-brained as
Some apps even replicate the process of pulling a slot machine lever with the pull to refresh feature.
I might not have all the lights and fancy sounds of a slot machine, but it's basically the same thing. It's the same experience that floods your brain with dopamine and anticipation of what's inside the mystery box. And like I mentioned earlier, Injustice 2 is over half a decade old now. That hype up, unlocking the crate noise that you get when you hold down the button, it's just like refreshing your Twitter. It's a slot machine. It's a slot machine mechanic that releases dopamine inside of your brain.
It takes us to an arcade full of computer games. Adult versions of what our children encounter on their screens, and programmed like poking machines.
It's not designed to help us, it's just designed to keep us hooked.
It's little brain hacks like that, like the slot machine trick. And it's present in these mobile games too, in video games that are designed for and marketed towards children. But what happens after a kid gets hooked?
Monumental meltdowns when the devices are taken away. They're reactions that are in fact symptoms of one of the major medical challenges of our time, being called internet addiction disorder. The bad moods and the tantrums are almost like withdrawal symptoms.
It is. There is something about it that changes their brain.
A child starts throwing a tantrum, or they become even violent because they're feeling this need to be back online.
Is handing devices like smartphones and tablets to young toddlers a path to addiction?
I think it can become potentially quite dangerous.
The issue of advertising to children has been a battleground for parents and lawmakers and corporate interests since long before the television was invented. There's a huge history there. The reason for all the concern about it from parents, as well as the desire to do it from marketers, is the same. It's unclear to a child that advertising is intended to make you buy something. Younger viewers are unlikely to understand the difference between advertising and entertainment, and fantasy and reality. Children under the age of 8 are mentally incapable of viewing and interpreting advertisements with a critical eye. Children are more trusting than adults and more likely to do what they're told. And that's exactly why broadcasters and marketers want to advertise to children. It's big business.
When I see how they work unlocking characters into the narrative, and then I consider the fact that the point of view character is Spider-Man, a character that's literally designed for younger kids to see themselves in, and as an adult, I can see it and I can kind of see through it, but it's not designed to manipulate me, it's designed to manipulate children. And that's what upsets me about this.
Since it's easier to control children than adults, and children wield enormous power over the spending of their parents, advertisements aimed at children deliver a huge bang for their buck. During an era of deregulation that spanned from 83 to 89, the floodgates were opened to children's shows built around toys. Toy sales drove plot lines on Saturday morning TV.
Reading through the story and reading what these characters are actually saying, Spider-Man doesn't read like a comic book character. He doesn't read like Spider-Man. He reads like a salesman that's trying to soft pitch you on why you should keep playing the game and spend more money on it and unlock more heroes.
The CTA dictates that shows may not include commercials for products related to the program or featuring characters from the program.
It's like this uncanny valley effect, and I don't like it. It's a far cry from when I was a kid and comic book games just tried to be straightforward comic book games, instead of trying to shill you on a new microtransaction every few minutes. It's the same experience that floods your brain with dopamine and anticipation of what's inside the mystery box. And like I mentioned earlier, Injustice 2 is over half a decade old now. That hype up, unlocking the crate noise that you get when you hold down the button, it's just like refreshing your Twitter. It's a slot machine. It's a slot machine mechanic that releases dopamine inside of your brain. Like I said at the start of the video, your mileage may vary with what you find acceptable in terms of advertising, but try to understand. Advertising has a tremendous impact on your subconscious, whether you're aware of it or not. So I want to apologize if my voice sounded off at any point. I kind of got sick in the middle of making the video, but then I just kept trucking through it anyway. I thought this was going to be one of those videos where I react to cringy, funny comic ads, kind of like my old TikTok video, but then it spiraled into this thing where I had to contextualize it all. It almost felt like I had to justify my degree by exposing the hidden secrets of the world of advertising. Regardless, I'm serious when I say this video couldn't have existed without the folks that I mentioned in the videos that I pulled clips from. So there's a playlist here if you want to see those videos, or if you want to check out some of the old school comic commercials that I mentioned earlier. I'd like to give a shout out to the channel members and my lovely supporters on Patreon. And lastly, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And be sure to let me know what you thought in the comments down below. I'll see y'all in the next one.
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next product.